Welcome to the Weather Insights Briefing. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. This is Sunday, September 15th, and the National Hurricane Center is watching two systems out in the Atlantic right now. We have this disturbance number one now with a 50% chance of development in the next 2 to 7 days. Looks like this is going to continue to drift north, even though it's been pretty stationary the last couple of days, and could eventually maybe even become a subtropical system. So right now, just bringing rain over to the southeastern portion of the United States, Carolinas, in that area. And then we have Tropical Storm Gordon. Looks like Gordon's going to be a fish storm, just meandering around the southern Atlantic basin there. Very minimal tropical storm with 40-mile-an-hour winds. You can see it on infrared here. A little spot out there is Gordon. And then that massive trough that at the end of that, on the left end of that, is disturbance number one. And then the intertropical convergence zone, active as it is this time of year with waves coming off at the African coastline, but nothing other than Gordon out there in the southern Atlantic basin that NHC is watching right now. And then we have in the eastern Pacific, we have some remnant moisture from what is now Tropical Depression Ileana that was a tropical storm, kind of headed toward Cabo and then veered off to the northeast and very close to the shoreline there of the western coast of Mexico, again throwing its moisture over northern Mexico and into southern Texas today. So Jeff, here we are on September 15th, just 5 days after the peak of hurricane season day, September 10th, but still in the middle of hurricane season, but not too active again for what we would expect for this time of year.
No, yeah, it's pretty dead out there for September 15th. Interestingly, even when we can barely get a storm going,
Yeah,
it looks like garbage. I mean, this is
yep.
Gordon. You think Gordon's here? Gordon is actually out here. You can see
Yeah.
the circulation is well removed from actually the thunderstorm activity. There's wind shear here, kind of blowing those thunderstorms off the center, and so it's not a healthy looking storm. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. We'll probably get some subtropical. This is looking pretty subtropical up here along the Carolina coast, which is going to produce a lot of wind and rain and coastal impacts here along the Carolinas. Not that uncommon this time of year to see that kind of stuff. And then the moisture here from the eastern Pacific decaying tropical system, the depressions actually back over here north of Baja.
Yep.
But all the moisture has been blown here across Texas on the tail end of this trough. And we actually still have, believe it or not, the remnants of Francine up here in northeastern Arkansas. And, like we talked about last week, a lot of those models were looping it back around. Well, sure enough, it's still sitting here and drifting back to the south now. And the old remnants of Francine and this coastal system off the Carolinas are going to get together and keep things unsettled here. And it's going to kind of block up the pattern across the United States this week. So we're going to have big trough and low pressure here in the southeast. We're going to have a ridge building across the plains. It's going to get hot in Texas. Everybody thought summer was over. It's not over yet. And then a kind of a trough here in the western United States. And so kind of a slowing down and blocking of the pattern here as we go forward. This is the forecast for Gordon. Not a whole lot going on with this. As it turns off to the northeast out here in the Atlantic, some of the ensemble guidance is starting to suggest it may find some more favorable conditions and develop potentially into a hurricane as it kind of drifts off in this area. But obviously, it's not going to impact anybody. And then the post-tropical cyclone, tropical depression, Ileana here in the Baja. So I mean, even the moisture is void of that, and that's what we kind of have in the water vapor. You can see this is the moisture pulling across Texas that may involve some scattered showers and thunderstorms in the deep South Texas today. Good news for those folks down there, and maybe even a couple here in the Houston area as the moisture boundary with Francine kind of backs in here from the northeast. So, but yeah, quiet as can be in the tropics. I don't know, what is Gordon, storm number 7, I think, for this year.
Sounds about right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a quiet year in a quiet year. So, the interesting thing is we've had a lot of impacts this year. We've had 3 hurricane impacts on the Gulf Coast, Beryl, Debbie in the Florida Panhandle, and then last week with Francine here in Louisiana. And so even though this is what we always kind of say, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the numbers, don't pay attention to the numbers. It's if the storms hit, and if they
Yeah.
hit you, it's a bad year for you. So, not to get away from the seasonal forecast stuff. I think there's gonna certainly be a deep dive here as
Yeah.
we get into after this hurricane season is over, is what in the world has happened. But a couple things we mentioned before. It's quiet in a lot of the basins. The West Pacific Basin is relatively quiet. The Eastern Pacific Basin, which we expected to be quiet, is quiet. So it's not just an Atlantic issue, whatever the issues are here, and there's kind of likely a combination of factors that are going to producing generally unfavorable conditions in the Atlantic. A lot of sinking air, a lot of stable air. It's not so much the dust and stuff from Africa. It's not really that. But one other thing to kind of just look at the satellite. You can see the westerlies here.
Yeah.
We call the westerlies. This is kind of the mid-latitude westerlies. They're coming on down to the Gulf Coast.
Mhm.
And so this is a sure sign of fall is not very far away. Yes, it's going to be hot this week, but when you start seeing the westerlies in the upper levels, 500 upwards in millibar, top of the atmosphere, the chances of getting anything to come up towards Texas every day that ticks by is less and less. So obviously, anything that would attempt to come this way would be pushed off to the east. You can just kind of see the steering flow here. And so getting toward that time of year now where the clock is ticking down for any more really big threats here for the state of Texas. So probably some good news for us that it remains quiet. I think in maybe a week, 7 days, may have to watch this area down here in the Western Caribbean. This is, as we get towards the first part of October, this tends to be the hot spot for development. But most of this stuff down here would either go into Central America or be yanked off to the north. So again, uh, a little bit of a good sign here if you're on the Texas coast that we're ticking days by without any significant threats out there.
Yeah, especially after the first half of October, the chances of landfall almost go to nothing, at least as far as Texas go. And yeah, to your point, this will be a very interesting case study to see why we didn't get the numbers that were originally forecast. And yeah, interesting satellite picture there, kind of an omega pattern with your high pressure in the middle of the United States and your two lows on the end. So that synoptic, yeah, that trough coming in. So that synoptic pattern very much going to have an influence on the next week or so. So we'll have to just see how things play out for the end of this hurricane season. Of course, remind you that you can get all the tropical updates from the Weather Insights YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can stay up on the latest in what's going on in the tropics. Jeff, thank you very much. Good stuff as always, sir.